It's important when we look at operations, you recognise the fact that this can actually be called a variety of different things, and we couldn't say for certain what it is that will be described in the case study. So for evidence of operations management, you might look for things such as production departments, or you might need to look for keys to how they manufacture things, or logistics, so that's how they get their product to the consumer. So whilst we're thinking about this, I just need to revisit this idea that operations management will tie closely with the objectives of all of the overall business, and we need to look at the long-term and the short-term plans, and remember that whatever the operations management department decides to do in order to try and meet their operational objectives, you need to consider that every other functional area, finance, marketing and HR, will all be, there'll be some sort of implicit effect on them. So when we look at the operational objectives then, it's easy just to split them down into different sort of target groups. So the first target group could be looking at the quality of our product or our service. So one of the things that you might judge your success on, and whether or not you meet this target, is you might look at customer satisfaction ratings. So it's quite common that you might have an opinion poll. So after you've carried out a product or a service, particularly if it's an online service or a product, you might have an email address and you might ask them to take part in a survey, and often because it gives because it gives them the opportunity to write in depth and not actually have to speak to somebody face to face, you might find that you get a more effective reply. It's something that you can build upon. We could look at, let's say, for instance, how many customer complaints do you get? Do you have a customer complaints department in every branch? Do you have a department in the organisation? Do you have a specific thing on your e-commerce website for customer complaints? And you might categorise them into minor or major, and look for some evidence, and obviously that will give you something that you can target then to say, I'm going to improve that specific thing. So then will become a SMART objective. You could look at the scrap rate of the organisation, so how many items are rejected during the production process. So I don't know, you might have a target of 0.5%. You can look for clues like, do you have new members of staff? Does that obviously mean that they're training? Have you got a machine that's malfunctioning? Does that indicate that the finance department need to find the finance in order to purchase a new machine? You can also look at punctuality, and what I mean by punctuality in this sense is how many of your orders are dispatched on time and how many of them meet the consumer's time frame. So particularly if you distribute your product using a third party. So if you don't have a distribution facility, you'll be dependent on Royal Mail or one of the other private distributing companies, and obviously they can then impact upon whether or not you get a good success rate and you're punctual in delivering your farms. We could look then at the kind of cost targets. So these are mainly relating to the production of our goods. So you could look at how do you reduce the unit cost. So remember, the unit cost is found by taking the total costs and dividing by how many goods it is that you prepare. Now obviously we would like a low or a lower unit cost, but you've got to decide how low can you go before the product is no longer what you want, what the customers are willing to pay. So we'll look at things like, how efficient are you? Do you have your production organised in the right way? Do you have your workers trained in the right way? Are you paying them, if it's a financial motivator, are you paying them to make sure that the units that they produce are acceptable to go to sale and don't have to be wasted. You could look at how can you reduce fixed costs. Now remember, this is the most difficult one. It's a common name for a business. Things like, especially if you take over another competitor, you'll then have two premises. Well, you could reduce your fixed cost by selling off one of those the premises. And so you wouldn't have to pay rent as a fixed cost. It's not really about moving to a lower rented premises. It's about how to reduce what you've got. So do you need to maybe retrench some of your stores, close the loss-making stores, so that the fixed costs that you do incur allow your business to generate profit? And finally then, you could reduce the variable costs. So remember, we might strive to find cheaper supplies or a cheaper way of manufacturing using the supply, because remember, it's not just about the raw materials. At this point, it could be about the direct labour. So if you have piece rate staff who are being paid on the piece rate, you've got to make sure that that variable cost is as low as possible. But at the end of the day, it has to be something that meets the need of the customer. Customers have to be satisfied and delighted by their product or service in order to ensure high quality customer service. So you've got to consider that variable cost element and how you reduce it without actually disadvantaging your business. If you move on to the volume targets then, so we could easily set, we would like to be able to produce X number of products. Now realistically, the number of products that you want to produce is the optimum to ensure that they are produced and sold. What you don't want to be left with is a glut of your product in the marketplace, because obviously that will then reduce the potential selling price. You could try and have targets in individual markets. So in the businesses that we're likely to be looking for in Bath 3, individual markets could be the UK, or it could be overseas. You could split that into northern and southern hemisphere countries. You've got to try and be picky and choose these appropriately. You could look at percentage growth targets. So for our overall production, for our overall output, how much growth would you like to see? Remember, this might be different for different parts of your business. If you take a retail outlet, in particular the supermarkets, let's say, there is a decline of the large out-of-store premises, but there's actually a high growth at the minute of city centre convenience stores that are operating, that are opening, because that's where consumers want to buy their products. But you could literally look at volume in comparison to other branches or organisations. So your business might have more than one factory. If we look at Nissan's factory in Washington could be compared with other ones on mainland Europe, or it could be compared with an Asian factory, and you can try and look at how our volume targets achieved. Are they met or are they missed? And it'll give you something to benchmark from. We could try and set a target for with regards to innovation. Now we haven't covered innovation yet, and it is one of the later topics. So you've got to think that to be innovative is to create something that's brand new. It's not to do something different with what we have. It's to be brand new. And the easiest way to manipulate this, if you like, as a target, is to look at how much are you going to spend on research and development, because that really equates to, if for every 10 products you research and you develop, one probably comes to the market and is a profitable product. And so you could consider something with research on that. Now, a lot of businesses, because of the change in nature in the market, have actually moved to trying to think about research and development expenditure as a percentage of sales. So if your sales flourish, you will be spending more on research and development. But if your sales are perhaps downcast because of the economic climate, then you will still continue research and develop, but you won't be putting, the percentage will stay the same, but in terms of substantial numbers, there will be a difference. Remember that there are lots of businesses who are purely in business to innovate and have their patents registered, and then they never actually make the product from the patent. They allow other people to use the patent and obviously receive a royalty payment. We could try and develop particular kinds of innovation. So if we go back to the car manufacturers, hybrid cars and electricity cars, cars that don't run on traditional methods of fuel, that's quite an innovative area that has been considered in the last few years. And then we could try and innovate to extend our product ranges. So one of the typical ones that you might find, Debenhams is a fairly noted retailer, but actually they have developed 25 designers at Debenhams ranges and 55 of their own brand ranges in order to have a choice, because it's important that customers feel they are receiving value for money. So it's no good just having high-end products. It's important to have a wide coverage, and so our product ranges themselves have to be innovative to meet the needs of other customers. Our last two possible operational objectives. Now, I need to remind you at this point, remember, these are clues that you would be looking for in the case study. It's highly unlikely you'll get a question just about this. It's there to support your proposal for or proposal against. It's there to support those arguments. So we could look at efficiency then. So last year we covered lots of efficiency calculations. So we could look at labour productivity then. So remember, labour productivity is calculated by the formula the output divided by the number of workers employed. And so that sort of indicates the number on average of products that each person or equivalent person produces. Now, obviously, there's going to be ups and downs for that, because you'll have things like, if there's been a decrease in it, maybe you'll look for, have you employed new staff? Maybe they won't be as competent because they're still undergoing training. Or it could be something like, maybe your employees have been on strike this year, so you haven't actually produced in your factory for a given number of days. So it's clues that we're looking for. You could look at the output per hour, or it could be a measure of production over a given time. Remember that it's still linked with efficiency. So maybe there is a wide variety of people. So I don't know, on the car manufacturing plants, I suspect that they've got to have X number of cars that roll off their production line every hour. And if you don't meet that target, then you can look at what's happening in the production line in order to try and ensure that you meet this target in the future. You could try and reduce your stock holding. So is it possible to reduce your stock holding even by half a day or a day? Have you got sufficient distribution methods in line and good realistic relationships with your suppliers to make sure that suppliers can adjust to peaks or troughs in your delivery requirements? Of course, we could just have just-in-time deliveries. So let's say, for instance, you could have Nissan require all of their suppliers to be within an X number of miles per range. It's equivalent to one junction on the motorway, and the reason for that is because they don't have space to hold the stock in the factory. But what they don't want is the production workers in the factory waiting. So they try and calculate how many of each stock item they will need in that time, and they work on how long will it take a supplier to load a wagon and deliver it. And that can be really effective if you can get that organised. And finally, you could look at the speed of response and action objectives. So let's say, for instance, this is more for service sectors. So I'm thinking about call centres. They have to, if you're phoning in a hotline, they have to answer it within a given number of ringtones. And so whilst they don't produce anything, their efficiency is measured on their capability to answer the telephone within a given period of rings. Now, finally, we move on environmental targets, and this has perhaps become a little bit more prominent. It's become quite important for businesses to be seen as doing these things. It pretty much depends on the kind of business you are and perhaps the kind of relationship that you hope to have. There are lots of businesses who this environmental issue is their unique selling point. And so it's absolutely imperative that they're able to consider these things. So I've just listed some things that businesses often use in their marketing of their unique selling point. So what do we actually want to think? It's vitally important that these objectives, you recognise the fact that it will be almost the same factors that affect every other objective from every other functional area, because we've got to remember this is a business as a collective whole. It's not a department that works in isolation. So you will see that these next two slides are virtually the same as what we looked at for financial objectives. So you set them because you want to have some focus, you want to be able to measure, you want to ensure that all of your staff are really have the same thing in mind, they're working towards it. And remember, to be efficient will allow you to keep competing in the marketplace. It doesn't matter how slow a marketplace moves. You need to be competitive, even if you're only following the market leader. And so it's all the same here. I have even included that we need to think about the other operational factors. So what kind of method of production? What is your customer service? What relationship do you have with your suppliers? What kind of training do you offer your staff? And finally, remember, I did tell you in the financial objectives that you would be looking next term at the external elements that impact upon the business. And so these will be the same. And you can see there, look, environmental from PESTLE. Remember, it won't necessarily just impact on the environmental targets. It could be any of the other operations management targets also.